Welcome to the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Tonight we speak one-on-one to Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. Now, his inauguration was hailed as one of the Pan-African events that was taking place across the African continent, and it has reaffirmed the feelings that there is an African renaissance in place. So we ask him tonight, what's his vision for Africa? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And we discuss much more besides that. Also on the show, of course, we have Africa's Top 10. And you get to share your views. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us on the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
I'm happy to be here, Julie.
Thank you. Now, the inauguration was an amazing event, not just for Kenyans, but I think for Africans. Just seeing so many heads of state present really, I think, reinvigorated the feelings of a rising Africa. For you, what was that day like? What were you feeling?
I think all I can say was the most amazing day. And amazing from the point of view that it really rekindled some deep inner thoughts about what it is that we're really after. This great new reborn baby called Africa. You know, the pride in people standing up for themselves despite the overwhelming pressure from external sources to go in another completely different direction. But the Kenyan people themselves just standing up and saying, no, we want to decide for ourselves and we will not be dictated to as to which way we will go. And I think that is what struck a chord with many Africans, wherever it is that they were. Because it was like Kenya basically saying, no, we want to chart our own course. It was Africa basically saying that, look, we don't want to be dictated to anymore. We want to chart our own course. We want to make our own destiny. And I really believe that that was the spirit and the feeling. And that's why, for me, it was very keen. Especially when we started receiving the kind of congratulatory messages from across the continent and actually from across the world, most of the developing nations. Wonderful, clear-cut messages of congratulations, not just to me, but to the people of Kenya. That 5 years down the road, 5 years when everybody thought that Kenya was a gone case, here we are, basically having completely reinvented ourselves, not under pressure from the United Nations, not under pressure from any foreign quarter, but Kenyans themselves deciding, we don't want to go back there. We know we've gone down the wrong path. And we are not happy with that. And we really want to reconstruct ourselves. I think it was a moment of pride, not just for Kenyans, but for the entire continent. And I believe that's why they came out in such great numbers.
So let's talk about Africa for a minute. What's your vision for the ideal Africa?
My vision for the ideal Africa is a continent where at least we can all be able to come together, to realize that we share common problems. And that for far too long, we have fought each other over our own problems without understanding that actually the solution to our problems lies in us being able to work together, lies in us being able to understand one another, lies in us being able to dialogue together. That really is the key message, that no single individual can actually make it alone. And nobody outside of ourselves is going to come up with a magic wand and create solutions for us. We will have to sit down, roll up our sleeves and say, look, here comes a moment, and it doesn't happen every day, but here comes a moment when we must all pull together and realize that my success is your success.
Can we do it?
I totally believe we can. How many people thought that it was impossible for the kind of coalition that we put together to work? Everybody told us it's impossible. everybody told us there's no way that coalition can hold together. Not only did it hold together, it held together, and people turned out in such huge numbers. It's more than a miracle, and it actually shows you that the impossible is possible if you're committed to it, and if you're determined. That that's the direction that you want to go. Because I think we have listened to the naysayers for far too long. We have refused to dream. We have refused to push the limits.
Some of us are the naysayers.
Unfortunately so.
I'll ask you to give them a message before this show closes. You spoke about the coalition, so let's move this back to Kenya for a moment and talk about that election. As we said, a successful election and peaceful, which was groundbreaking. But there were some hugely pensive moments. In the week of the elections, of course, the process started with a digital count from the IEBC, and then they went back down to zero. At that point, you were well in the lead. You're watching the numbers. All of a sudden, they say, we're going manual, we're going down to zero, and Uhuru Kenyatta is watching. What is he thinking?
I can tell you it was equally as difficult for me, because I really didn't know what was going on. Right? Especially when the screens went sort of still for such a long time. But ultimately just having that faith and saying, no, we hold through. And I think that was especially the support that you got from people close to you, telling you, no, we trust in God and everything's actually going to be, okay. So even when we had to start counting again, of course, I mean, I'll lie to you if I say that I was sitting somewhere, calm, cool, and collected. No, I mean, it was a concerning moment. Like you're saying, I was just as much on edge, as everybody else. But ultimately, I think for me, it was the Friday.
We weren't here. Yes, you were expecting the announcement. We were getting thousands of Kenyans sending SMSs saying, what's going on, what's going on? So what is Uhuru Kenyatta doing on Friday at, for instance, at 9 to 10 p.m.?
We were getting ready to go to Bomas, because we had been told the announcement is, and we had our own little center up and running at somewhere close by to Bomas. So I was getting myself ready to go. We were meeting up there with my deputy so that we could hear the result together. So we had, sort of put our families together. We had, he had put his family together, and we were meeting now at this place because we had been told the results were going to come out. We had 2 speeches prepared. No, actually it was 2.5, because there was the one of acceptance, and we had a speech prepared if we had lost, and then we had a halfway speech in case we were going for a rerun. But we were very confident. We were hoping that it was either we were going to win. Now the problem was we didn't know whether we would meet the 50+1. And just as we were getting into the cars to drive out, everybody tense and everything else, we were told, nope, it's not today. It's going to be tomorrow at 11. I can tell you that was a very deflating moment, because we were all just hoping that this was actually the end. And I just proceeded to say, enough is enough. I hadn't slept properly for a long time.
I'm going to sleep.
I'm going to sleep. And you can't imagine that after going to sleep, my youngest son wakes me up at 6 o'clock in the morning. He's unable to talk. He's just telling me, because look at the TV screen.
Media has announced. And then it's afternoon on Saturday, and the IEBC announces that you are the winner. And there's all this excitement. I think you headed to your campaign team's headquarters for the announcement.
Correct.
What were you feeling?
An incredible feeling. I mean, I won't call it joy. I won't call it relief. Is there something that blends all those different feelings, and does it have a name? Whatever that name is what I was feeling.
What you were feeling.
Relief, joy, yeah? All of a sudden fatigue just drops on you. It's all sorts of different mixed emotions.
I think it certainly came across, I think, even on the cameras for the country. Let's just contrast that with your journey over the past 5 years. Uhuru, you've been through sitting in the ICC, going through difficult campaigns, tense moments, and joining up with William Ruto and finally forming this coalition. There have been extreme highs and extreme lows over the past 5 years. As a leader, what would you say are the attributes or the values that you think have carried you through the past 5 years?
I think the first one is faith and trust in God. And I'll say that those are the two most important things, because I think the first question I asked myself going through all of this is, I've been accused of some of the most heinous crimes I could ever imagine. I have a wife, I have my children, I have my family. And here it is that somebody close or attached to them has been accused of things that are completely unimaginable in my mind. And let me tell you, that's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing, both from the point of view of yourself, but especially when you imagine your kids and how people are looking at them in school or wherever they're associated. Your father is, this. But ultimately, I sat with myself and I said, am I guilty of what I'm being accused of? And in my mind and in my heart and in my soul, I knew I wasn't. And I said, I'm not now going to focus myself on what I'm accused of. I'm going to focus myself on what I know to be the truth. And the truth is, I'm not guilty of anything of that. And neither am I going to stand up there and be put down because somebody, right, has accused me of something of which I know I am totally innocent, right? And I sat with my kids and I told them, you know where I was. You know what was going on around that time. You know where you were, right? And you know I'm not guilty of this. And they told me, yeah. And I said, so you hold your head up high. We will move on with life. We will deal with those challenges, right? But we know that at the end of the day, no matter how long it takes, the truth will come out. But we're not just going to sit back there, right, and say because we've been accused of that our life comes to an end. No. It just begins, and it gives you a new invigoration to fight and to ensure that the truth comes out. If nothing else, to vindicate yourself, right, and to be able to march on. And that's not going to happen if you want to put your tail between your legs until running away. You face it, and you face it knowing that one day, no matter how long it takes, the truth will come out. And that woke me up every morning and gave me courage to keep moving on.
To take part in our weekly hangouts, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Twitter, @AfricaLD. Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Looking back at Africa, and we could go on with this forever, but let's move back to Africa and all the efforts that Kenya made in Somalia and the regional rise of the East African region, and a concern now that maybe there's an economic scramble for Africa that will see indigenous African businessmen fail to benefit, and communities. How do we, in terms of your foreign policy and your government, how are you going to ensure that as all these funds are coming into Africa, that you're protecting the interests of the people?
I think the first thing is, I think that's a couple of questions in one. Mm-hmm. I think the first thing that we need to focus ourselves on is Somalia has been with us for over 20 years. And for over 20 years, it is us in the region, us in Kenya, who have borne the brunt of the crisis in Somalia. It is us who have been hosts to hundreds of thousands of refugees in our country, yeah? Bearing that burden, bearing the economic burden, bearing the social burden that comes with it, bearing the destruction of our own environment, knowing that those camps are in very fragile ecosystems, right? It is us, ultimately in latter years, who have had to face the brunt, right, of the reign of terror, with Al-Shabaab almost bringing our tourism to the knees, ultimately with the church bombings and etc. that have been occasioned. It is us who have had to bear the piracy problems as a result of the piracy issues along the Somali coast, affecting our own trade, affecting the cost of our inputs as a result of increased insurances, lack of vessels that really are willing to ply that route. And all that's happening is that cost is being loaded upon Kenya, Uganda. We've, in a nutshell, borne the brunt of all of this. We have talked with the international community all these years. We need to do something about this. This is a failed state. Help us, get involved. Right? But ultimately, what was the game changer in all of this? The game changer was the day Kenya decided, right, together with her regional partners, that we've had enough and we are going to take care of this ourselves. And with our own resources, with our own soldiers, our own blood, we decided we were going to go into Somalia and bring control. And that's precisely what's happened. And that game changer is what has allowed for a peaceful election and a Somali government to be elected in Mogadishu, the first proper election in 22 years. Now, it's amazing now that once there's been some kind of sense of stability, once there's been some way forward, that is 100% as a result of regional initiative. Now the whole world can't stop falling over themselves, trying to take credit, trying to say, now this is what we need to do, now this is what we need to do, now that's what we need to do. And like we told them in London, at the end of the day, we all want support for Somalia. But never forget, right, that us in the region must take control and must lead in that direction. Because ultimately, if that's not the case, then it is going to be plain and obvious to everybody that the reason they're now moving into Somalia is because they're seeing the potential of stability, and their agenda is nothing more than a scramble for the resources of Somalia now that there seems to be some direction, but was never really the interest of the Somali people, peace in the region, stability in the region, security in the region. And we must be cognizant of that. And we must always ensure that as much as they are now trying to project their interest, we must never forget what our primary responsibility is. And that is the peace, security, stability of our region and the prosperity of our region. And we should not and must not allow a scenario where others are going to come in for a new scramble of Africa, cause us to get back into the problems that we've had. We must always be guided by knowing that we must take a lead, not because we have a personal interest in Somalia, but we have a personal interest in the security and the stability and ultimately the prosperity of our region.
How is this best addressed? Is it at national level, regional level, or should we actually be discussing this and doing things, seeing action at continental level?
I believe that the first is we must first of all be able to identify what is our national interest, and ultimately see how that national interest is expressed through a regional voice, right? Because we need to act in concert with the region. And then from there, right, we work on our continental agenda, right? In a manner, because what's going on in Somalia is not peculiar to Somalia. We've seen what's happening now in Mali. We know what's happening in the Central African Republic. These are all hotspots, fragile states, which just in the same way that we have taken regional action with regard to Somalia, we also need a continental view to see how do we ensure that this scramble for resources, which I personally believe ultimately is the cause of a lot of the instability in some of these other parts as well, right, is handled from a point of view of continental interests. And we shouldn't be sitting back there saying that we're waiting for the French to come in or so and so to come in. We need to work as an African Union and say, no, look, it's time we started taking responsibility for our own peace and security, right? With the knowledge that, the resources that people are fighting for are African resources that are meant for our prosperity, not for our death.
I wanted to touch on your commitment to the people of Kenya, but also by extension to the African continent, because as our nations grow and flourish, we contribute to the growth of the collective. I would like you to look at that camera and give your word to the people of Kenya and also to the people of Africa. What do you think they need to keep in mind in this new era?
I think primarily the thing that we need to keep in mind is that we were all put here for a purpose. And I believe that that purpose was not for ourselves to kill each other, but to work together for our mutual prosperity, for us to recognize that the prosperity of the individual is ultimately linked to the prosperity of the whole. And the only way we'll be able to achieve that is through working together, is through realizing that our problems don't come out as a basis because of our ethnicity or our religion or our nationhood, but rather an understanding that what we need to really tackle is poverty, lack of proper medical facilities, improving our infrastructure, ensuring that our young men and women have jobs. And once we tackle and focus on these issues and focus on them together, realizing that the only way to do so is for us to work together and to get an African solution as opposed to waiting for somebody to come and bail us out. I believe if we focus ourselves as Africans, recognizing that we are all here and our success, or my success is your success, I have no reason to doubt that within the next 50 years, Africa is going to be the continent to be looked out for.
Thank you so much. Finally, paint a picture of Kenya when your term is over. Could be 5 years, could be 10 years. What does Kenya look like?
Kenya to me looks bright. It looks hopeful. It looks very youthful. It looks creative. It looks fed. It looks housed, clothed, with proper medical facilities for especially our women, which is something that we really focused on in our manifesto. But to crown all of that, it looks hopeful that we will remove the despair that has pervaded our society and our nation for many years and replace that with hope of a bright, prosperous future.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Julie.
Nice
to be with you.
All the best.
Tufanye kazi.
Thank you.
To take part in our weekly hangouts, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Twitter, @AfricaLD. Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues. To take part in our weekly hangouts, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Twitter, @AfricaLD.
Now it's time that you have your say.
This week we asked you which country you thought would feature on our top 10 and why. Justin Charlo says, I bet South Africa will make that list, reason being minerals it boasts of which are great export earners. The country has also created a conducive environment that is quite attractive to investors.
Judy Gichuru says, South Africa, she's a fine mix of culture, patriotism and independence. Nigeria, she's the epitome of a growing economy. Kenya, a country open to accommodation, having given overwhelming support to South Sudan and Somalia. Rwanda, a country united to rise. Somalia, after 22 years of chaos, they are finally getting it right.
Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature the most competitive economies in Africa based on the Global Competitiveness Index 2013. At number 10 is Zambia. Ranked 102nd out of 144 countries, Zambia is up 11 places from its position in 2012. At number 9 is Gabon, which ranks 99th globally. At number 8 on Africa's Top 10 is the Gambia, which is just ahead of Gabon at 98th. The Gambia is up 1 position from last year. At number 7 is Namibia, ranking at position 92. The Southern African nation has dropped 9 places from its previous ranking of 83rd. Botswana comes in at number 6 with a ranking of 79, up 1 place from its position last year. At number 5 is the Seychelles with a global ranking of 76th. At number 4 is Morocco. The North African state is ranked 70th, up 3 places from last year's ranking. The East African nation of Rwanda takes the number 3 slot. Ranking at 63rd globally, it jumped 7 places from its previous ranking of 70th in 2012. Still on the East African coast at number 2 is Mauritius, ranked at number 54. It stays at the same position it held last year. At number 1 is South Africa. Ranked 52nd out of 144 countries, it has dropped 2 places from last year's global ranking, but nevertheless retains the lead in Africa. That's Africa's Top 10 most competitive economies.
While Africa is on the rise with 7 of the world's top 10 fastest growing economies, the continent must also address the fact that 14 out of 20 of the lowest ranked economies on the Global Competitiveness Index are African. Well, we close with a quote from Uhuru Kenyatta, and he says, "We will continue to be a strong partner in the understanding that true multilateralism, founded on mutual respect for each country's views and political processes, is the only lasting way we can successfully solve the common challenges we all face." Well, that's it from the Africa Leadership Dialogues for this week, but we'll have so much more for you coming up. We look forward to being with you again next week. I'm Julie Gichuru. Blessings.